Natural disasters, an inevitability that exists outside the control of humanity? Or something that arises from a concoction of social, political, economic and environmental factors?
What was once a thriving coastal community, now desolate.
There are 11,000 such disasters over the last 50 years. 2 million people have lost their lives. The economic damage is growing hugely, 7 times more than it was in the 1970s. And most of those people who died in these different disasters have been living in poorer countries, in developing countries.
The bad news is that the economic losses have been growing very rapidly, and this growth is supposed to continue.
Unchecked anthropogenic processes from existing socio-environmental arrangements have been a key contributor to global warming, affecting environmental phenomena dependent on global thermodynamic conditions. Climate change has increased the intensity and scale of seasonal meteorological shocks such as typhoons, and their corresponding physical effects. The combination of global environmental stressors and seasonal environmental shocks have compounded the risks of natural disasters occurring worldwide. Lest vulnerable coastal communities enter a chronic state of disaster, there is an impetus for the reorganization of the conventions of time, space, and culture through the establishment of a new relationship with the littoral with an adaptive capacity for environmental stresses and shocks intensified by climate change. Home to 2.62 billion people with approximately 77% of the population living in coastal areas, Southeast Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change and rising sea levels, mapping the region for typhoons, a predominant environmental shock. Vietnam and Philippines are identified as most vulnerable. The Philippines is subjected to stronger and more typhoons as opposed to Vietnam due to its geographical location. For prototypical studies, Vietnam presents itself as more ideal, owing to typhoons of lower frequency and intensity as well as socio-political conditions that have given rise to the fluidity of land statuses that respond to greater socio-economic needs. 31% of the Vietnamese population resides in coastal regions, placing millions at risk from inundation by storm surges and sea level rise. Based on disaster indexing over the past 20 years, the north-central coastal regions are most susceptible to disasters. Tua Tien Hue province is selected for greater study as it serves as an excellent representation of the north-central coast, in terms of geography, ecology, and culture. It houses Dam Giang Cao Hai Lagoon System, the largest lagoon in the region and a key economic and ecological asset of the province. It is sheltered from the sea by a perilously thin strip of coastal sand dune that is a threat from erosive forces, extraction of sand for construction, and urbanization. With the various issues brought up thus far, a paradigm shift is required in order for society to adapt. By the end of the century, inundation of 1 meter from sea level rise or more when taking into account relative sea level rise will inevitably lead to the expansion of water bodies and the shrinkage of land masses. This will transform the landscape to that of an archipelago, with areas of higher elevation turning into islands. The archipelago is a natural condition that is especially relevant within this discussion. It is a cluster of islands in a body of water, a natural geological formation exemplifying the spatial-temporal relationship between land and water. It is the natural and logical next phase of evolution for the world's coasts given rising sea levels. The archipelago brings about many ecological services and benefits such as improved water flows to prevent eutrophication, multiplying coastal habitats for wildlife, and doubling up as a wave and wind attenuator. Looking at Dam Giang Cao Hai Lagoon, majority of settlements straddle the border between terrestrial and aquatic territories. Projection of inundation from 1 to 5 meters place close to majority of settlements at risk of inundation, exacerbating risks of disaster. Inundation at the 5 meters elevation marker is already a reality 20 years ago from the most impactful typhoon to hit the province in modernity. In the face of planetary scale change, resistance is futile. One needs to accept the projected changes and adapt accordingly.
People have been building dikes to protect land that has been considered as useful. And I mean, one of the big wishes of the Vietnamese government was, we want a dike along the whole coast. And we put a big road on it, and we go as close to the sea as we can.
While intensive hard engineering is an option for securing urban settlements from these hydro-morphological changes, it requires extensive maintenance and will face eventual obsolescence should inundation projections underestimate actual inundation in the future. As such, there will be a shift in national policy from socio-economic prosperity towards socio-ecological prosperity. For coastal communities to effectively adapt to climate change, 3 key pillars have been identified: resilient landscapes, resilient ecologies, and resilient communities. These will be achieved through the creation of an augmented archipelagic landscape that leverages on existing hydro-morphological patterns of sediment accretion, novel coastal engineering technologies, and sustainable, regenerative means of production. Creating or augmenting this landform is not a new concept. There are many natural, artificial, and hybrid precedents. Natural precedents of interest would include that of atolls, which are ring-shaped coral reef island series of islets, surrounding a lagoon, birthed from volcanic activity and shaped by hydrodynamic forces of erosion and sedimentation. Hybrid precedents, on the other hand, utilize natural and artificial processes to create the archipelago. Examples such as Marker Wadden, possessing similar bathymetry to Tamjiangkou High Lagoon of 2-4 meters, strong winds have created waves that churn up the sediments, creating turbid water conditions at the detriment of wildlife. The creation of the archipelago in this case is to create calm water habitats for proliferation of wildlife. The islands are created through dredging of a catchment area for collection of sediments which sea is used to replenish over time the islands. A second example is the Blue Dunes, which are a barrier island chain for the eastern continental U.S. coast. Initiated after Hurricane Sandy, it aims to protect the U.S. coast from future storm surges. Phase 1 includes 67 kilometers of barrier islands, with Phase 2 having 77 kilometers of barrier islands. The enormity and scale is not directly transferable, but it serves as a good reference with regards to island widths and operating depths and distance from the coast. Lastly, for artificial precedents we have the very large floating systems. They are floating infrastructures that address the need for low-impact, developable land on aquatic territories. Of interest are pneumatically stabilized platforms which have cylindrical modular blocks that can be agglomerated to form load-bearing structures with ease of configurations. Each cylinder houses air slightly above atmospheric pressure, allowing it to attenuate the waves and bear loads. Sizes for open sea are 6 by 6 by 12 m, and 7.3 by 7.3 by 3 m for protected waters. Floating systems are subjected to 6 ranges of motion, hence mooring is needed in order to establish these systems onto the site and improve comfort of occupants through management of these ranges of motion. More innovative typologies such as the floating forest, a novel breakwater windbreak structure protecting against not only waves but wind hazards. Developed by researchers for use in areas prone to typhoons, it is relevant and can be adapted to for this project.